make sure that I can look anyone in the eye and say that you earned the grade that you got. And so that's why I've given you some of these shorter chapters or shorter readings to do, and also some short writing assignments. So I'll have at least one of those. I'll have you do an assignment or two out of chapter 10. It's an awesome chapter. And I should just say as an editorial note, I hope that you keep this book. You know, I wasn't as thrilled with it last year, but they came out with a new edition, the Managing Human Behavior in Public and Nonprofit Organizations. It really is a great book, and it has some good things that you can do as far as exercises go and that sort of thing. So, all right, so let's talk about teamwork. Go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. I put it up on Blackboard under Documents. And the first slide after the title slide, you'll see I've entitled Teamwork When 1 + 1 is Greater Than 2. And I kind of use the age-old example of a draft horse. So a draft horse, two draft horses pulling together cannot pull twice as much as one. They can actually pull 3 times as much. So the two draft horses can pull 8,000 pounds each alone, but when you put them together, they can pull 24,000 pounds. And I think it's just a great example, because it's exactly the same when we get humans together working well, I should say, on a team. The sum of the team's efforts will be greater than I should say the product of the team's efforts should be greater than the sum of the parts, or you may not have the right people on the team, or they may not be well trained enough or motivated enough in order to, or resourced. There's many factors we'll talk about that goes into having a team that's a high productive team. All right, so what is a team? Seems pretty basic, but our book defines team as a group of people with a high degree of interdependence geared toward the achievement of a goal or the completion of a task. Smith and Katzenbach said that all teams must have a meaningful purpose, specific performance goals, common approaches, complementary skills, and mutual accountability to work. So, you know, I kind of call that the why, what, how, when. A team should never be put together unless there's a clear purpose, and that is the why. Why are we doing this? Because, you know, our culture is still geared in many ways towards individual achievement and the value of the individual. And surveys show us, we'll see later, that our people in America tend to value individuals over teams, small groups, big groups, whatever. And so if there isn't a why, people are going to naturally resent even being part of a team, I found. We rolled out Toyota Kata Lean at Ottawa County over the last 6-7 years. And what I've found is that people initially are even a little ticked off because, you know, they're in their routine. You know, they've got their habit. They know their job. They don't see the value of the lean process when we start. So I'd say the first few months are that way. They're just generally a little put out that they have to, you know, set aside maybe an hour a day a week. It's a major time commitment. But ultimately, at the end of 6 months, they're really bought in, and they say, wow, I actually got to make decisions. I actually got to test my thinking. Some of my ideas, were they good? Were they bad? And then come up with another one. So it wasn't just my boss telling me what to do. I actually got to take some ownership with the rest of the team in solving this problem, which is typically improving the process when you're looking in the local government and nonprofit sectors. And so the why are we doing it? And it should be compelling. And then the team ends up being part of the how. So why and how? Well, how we're going to get this team together. We're going to use our collective brains, talents, resources to improve this process. And then the what exactly, specifically are we going to do? Many times there's a team charter. And then when, you know, there's a timeline, you know, for every team. Some teams are ongoing, some teams are put together for a single purpose. So third point I have under definition of team, Without a commitment to achieving a goal or the completion of a task, a group is not a team. And so it isn't just a bunch of people getting together to have coffee and donuts in the morning. There's got to be a purpose, a driving purpose to do it, or people won't buy in, and it'll be a waste of time, and you'll actually set the organizational culture back instead of moving it forward. Many times, companies or organizations start teams as a way to build camaraderie, build culture, and of course get things done in a more efficient and effective way. But obviously, if it's not done well, it can actually harm the organizational culture. All right. So, work team and team distinctions, or work group and team distinctions. So work groups typically have single supervisors. Hold on a sec. I got to make a change here before I load this up for you guys. All right. So work groups typically have single supervisors or leaders and are best described by what they produce. Teams have a considerable degree of self-management, so they share responsibility. It isn't just the boss telling this group what to do every day. There's more of a shared responsibility among the team members to get stuff done. And they also have authority for assessing their own performance. So typically, a charter is put out, which is just a fancy word for, the boss, the chief administrator, the department head, the supervisor says, look, we need to save a month out of this audit process. We need to save a week out of the time it takes to issue this permit to residents once we get an application. I mean, those are just a couple quick examples of some of the kinds of things a team might be put together to do. In general, work groups lack the level of consistency, intensity, and restless dissatisfaction found in teams. So many times you get a lean or a kata team together, improvement team, ultimately after being kind of ticked off, they get kind of excited and they're looking for things to improve. And that's a great stage to be in, because both the individuals and the organization will benefit greatly from that itch, that curiosity, that sense that they're empowered and able to make things better. Functionally, work teams manage more of their own work processes and performance. They undertake more systematically the ongoing tasks of team development, and typically they're going to produce superior results, especially in cases where you got to figure it out. I mean, if everybody knows what to do and it's just a matter of needing more hands on deck to do exactly what the supervisor says, that's not exactly the kind of team that most organizations are trying to move to at this point. All right, team thinking progression. We've talked about W. Edwards Deming. I've kind of given you this list before in class, but the 80s, you're talking quality circles. So when I graduated from grad school, I actually did a paper at MSU on quality circles. Told quality management was kind of the next iteration of the quality movement. I actually implemented that in South Haven when I was city manager there. The 2000s kind of brought on, late 90s, early 2000s brought on QS 9000 as a standard for manufacturing, and later for office type work as well, as far as how do you know when you meet that quality benchmark. Six Sigma in 2010s. And now I think you're right on the cutting edge with some of the readings we've done in Team of Teams as far as where our organizations go. It's teams. So you look at McChrystal and the team that he had in Afghanistan, and the fact that they were kind of getting their butt kicked by a much less resource provisioned, organized opponent, because that opponent was far more networked and fluid. And so McChrystal lays out, he just did a brilliant job of reorganizing how teams worked within that formal structure. So he didn't change the U.S. Army. He didn't change the formal military structure, but he was able to implement a different team approach and team organizational structure within the bigger structure. And I think that something I'm looking at in Ottawa County since I read Team of Teams, and I think in order to compete in a fast-moving network, global type world that we're in, organizations are going to need to continually move towards more of that format. All right, so team use in public and nonprofit orgs. Why do it, right? The why. Okay, well, teams are used for a variety of reasons in public and nonprofits. Typically, resources are more restricted than the private sector. Teams outperform individuals, so we've talked about that. The sum of team performance should not be the sum of 1 plus 1 plus 1 if you have a three-member team, but it's a much greater product. And then a recent study of more than 200 nonprofit orgs found that it was not the social entrepreneurs who made the difference in the growth of nonprofits. It was a teamwork with public, private, nonprofit, which we do a great job of in West Michigan and also in Ottawa County. But it's when you can build those networks and share resources and share talent, share the brain power, that you really see the growth in some of these organizations. Also, by having teams, partnerships, you can access resources easier. I was able to get 264,000 of about $1 million from two foundations, the Grand Haven and Holland Foundations, for our DEI program at Ottawa, because I put together a public sector team. I had another 250,000 coming from private sector organizations, and then I had Ottawa County in for about 400,000. I was able to get the rest from the nonprofits. So they really love to fund cross-sector team type efforts, and so you can actually get more money if you collaborate across sector or within sector than you can if you try to go it alone and just go for these grants sometimes. All right, so we're moving on to the next slide, team assessment assignment. So I'll also send this separately in a message on Blackboard, but I'd like you to go to to Denhardt, pages 314 to 317, and I'd like you to evaluate a team you've been a part of. Now, yeah, obviously it'd be great if it were a workplace or school-related team. I'll bet you've been on plenty of teams at Grand Valley, but if you got none of the above, which I doubt, but if you have none of the above, you know, it can be anything. It can be a softball team you were on, or soccer team, or whatever, if you don't have a good business or school example. And what I'd like you to do is, from pages 314 to 317, evaluate that team based on the criteria you find on those pages. Write at least a one-page paper on your findings, send it to me via GVSU email, and this will be worth 10 points. So as many of you noted, my test was 10 questions short. The reason that was, last year it was actually a 90-point test, and I decided to make it a 100-point test. I kind of redid the grading and points in the class, and so I made a gap for those questions, and then I didn't do it. So that's why you had 10 of the multiple choice missing, and it ended up being a 90-point test instead of a 100-point test. So to make the points work out in the class, I'm just adding this 10-point assignment. So, all right, let's talk about types of teams. So you've got the next slide. You've got top management teams, and that's going to be, that could be directors in a private corporation. It could be elected officials in a government sense, but it's the people at the top. And in this sense, sometimes it's the people who are responsible more for the vision and mission of the organization and maybe not the nuts and bolts. And I think that's more prevalent in the private sector, where you have a board of directors that fulfills that kind of role. That's my phone ringing, taking me a little bit off task here. All right, then you have, I think though that in the public sector, that top management team is going to be more made up of the actual managers and department heads that run the organization. And so I put together a lot of teams that have myself, my deputy administrator, fiscal services director, IT director, HR director, facilities, or it could be sheriff, could be the clerk treasurer, the clerk register, the prosecutor, health department director, mental health director. So it could be any number of people that are pulled together for a given team. And that's still kind of a top management team. They're the people that run those departments and offices. And so sometimes they're the ones that come together for a top management team. Project teams are put together basically And I'm rolling through the slides here, so you just have to kind of keep up. So the project teams are formed by management for a specific mission, purpose, or task. Membership on the team is based on individual expertise and experience. And this type of team will last long enough to solve a problem, and then it disbands, and maybe the same team or maybe a similar team with different members comes together to for the next purpose, problem, issue. Cross-functional teams can serve a couple different purposes. They solve a problem. They also exist to get a task or a problem that needs to be resolved. And then they also serve the purpose of breaking down barriers that exist in a hierarchical organization. So, for example, Ottawa County has 36 departments, offices, agencies, and courts. When I arrived here, it was very siloed. Not only lack of transparency and knowledge between many of the silos, but some didn't like each other. There was a lot of unhealthy competition for resources and that type of thing. So one of the things I did was starting to put together cross-functional teams to look at tough issues the organization faced. And we were able to, that and a lot of training that we did with cross-functional folks was all able to bring us much closer together. We have much more, well, 17 years later, hopefully something good happens, right? But we have a much more cohesive culture where we know about each other, like each other, work very well together. And COVID's a great example. I mean, we have had a kick-butt team that I'd put up against anyone that has dealt with this crisis since day one. Process improvement teams, that's when I talk about lean, Toyota Kata, that's what I'm talking about. You're using quality principles that started with Deming and have improved through the years. Toyota's done a lot to improve those. And basically you're applying principles to process so that you can shorten processes, make them cheaper, turn out products, policies, services, permits, whatever it is, faster. And so you cut down the timeline. People need to wait for things, and maybe do them cheaper. That's what process teams do. And people are trained in it. So you may get the same people coming back many times in a certain area. Some happen within departments, some are cross-functional, and ultimately it can be a core strategy to build an organization. I've always said you've got revenue, and when you're in the public and nonprofit sector, there's a portion of that that's always at risk. Tax revenue is pretty stable for governments, but state and federal revenue is not. And so I've kind of positioned this in Ottawa as a way to create more revenue by really working our processes and reducing the costs there, because that's money we can save that nobody can take away from us. And once we save it, it's a savings for good. And then we can decide either we can reduce taxes people pay, or we can use those efficiencies to provide better services. Somebody's really intently trying to get a hold of me this morning, but we'll power through this. All right, okay, that's process improvement. Moving on to self-directed teams. So organizations are increasingly using self-directed or self-managed teams. Any of the previously discussed teams could also function as a self-directed team. Self-directed teams work within a framework or boundary, so usually the chief administrator or a department head or a supervisor, manager, somebody is kind of chartering or putting the team together, and then also giving it its boundaries. So, hey, you got this amount of money to work with, you've got this much time to work with, these are the resources, this is the special training you'll need, but you make sure everybody understands why they're there, what they're doing, when it's due, and what resources they have to get her done. As Larry the Cable Guy said, get her done, right? Okay. Self-directed teams then work within the framework or boundary of the obligations that are laid out by the boss. Crucial success factors for self-directed teams. So management wants to increase employees' emotional ownership of the tasks they perform. You know, when Hayworth implemented Lean the second time, they've done 3 different iterations, they actually sent a survey to all employees and said, list the processes that you're responsible for. And initially there were a bunch of people that said, what the heck, I'm not responsible for any processes. But if you work in an organization, as many of you do, you are responsible for processes. You may not think of it that way. And then the message Hayworth had for employees was, every day when you're working on processes, think about how they could be improved. How could I do this better? And then you need a culture where somebody working on a process feels safe to suggest improvements to their supervisor. And that's a lot more work than it seems, because if the supervisor is one that feels threatened by somebody who they think is smarter than them, or somebody that has better ideas than them, or if they're so busy and so stressed being a supervisor that their first reaction is they don't want to be bothered by it, or that's a dumb idea, or we tried that 100 years ago and it didn't work. I mean, that can kill an idea, and it can kill a culture, because how supervisors react in that moment will probably either encourage more ideas on how to improve things, or it'll put a damper on it and people will never give you a good idea again. All right. So team needs resources, team needs the right training, you need the right motivation. It's important that team members like each other, well, at least respect each other and work well together. And trust in an organization, it sounds really trite, it's almost a buzzword, everybody loves to say it, but I can tell you after 17 years that building trust is hard daily work. And trust can slip downhill faster than you can imagine, and it takes a long time to build up. And once you have it, it's amazing what can be done. I'm going to take this call real quick, and I'm not going to stop this. Al Vanderberg. Hey, Matt, can I call you back in like 20 minutes? Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Bye. Yeah, sorry about that. That was one of my commissioners. We're writing a letter to the governor, and he has some input for me on it. And I didn't want to turn this off. I know this is already a little clunky this morning, but it is what it is, right? We're all kind of making lemonade out of lemons yet. All right. And then team members are equally committed to the success of the team and to the success of the larger organization. All right, some misconceptions of self-directed teams. Next slide. All right, so self-directed teams do not need leaders. Everybody's a leader in an organization, and everybody on that team is going to be a leader. That's why understanding roles, understanding why, understanding what the outcomes need to be is so important. So they do need leaders. They need leaders outside the team that kind of hold them accountable, set them up, resource them, all that, and they need leaders inside the team. Somebody needs to be, even if you don't call them a chairperson or something like that, someone needs to kind of, and maybe several people take charge in a team for different types of the work that they're doing or different aspects of the work that they're doing. Another misconception, leaders lose power and transition to self-directed teams. This is probably the biggest problem in actually moving our organizational culture forward, is that people kind of clawed their way to wherever they got, middle management, upper management, in the old system, the old hierarchical Frederick Taylor kind of system. And power, knowledge is power, you didn't share it, you know, it was, and so you got there that way, and so you're very much afraid, I'm saying in general, many are very much afraid to allow a self-directed team to exist because they feel like it's going to take away from their power, and if their power equals their value, then they're not going to be needed and they're going to lose their job. So that's kind of the thought process, unfortunately, that many leaders go through, instead of understanding that when you unleash the power of people who work for you, you're going to get more and more power, more informal power. I mean, you're probably not going to improve on the org chart, but it's amazing how much you will grow and your influence will grow as you help other people gain influence and power themselves. So, and then also that employees are waiting for the opportunity to be empowered. I learned this during our Disney Way process, training process. I learned something new, and that's that employees need to be told it's okay to do good things, especially if they're different than the routine that they're in. And so we were asking people to do fantastic customer service for our fantastic residents. And I thought, well, that's a no-brainer. They all want to do this. Well, I think they all want to do it, but they're afraid to step out. And it's amazing what can happen. I'm just overwhelmed by our people and what's happened since we trained 900 people for 2.5 days on Disney Ottawa Way customer service. It's freaking unbelievable. I've had over 20 deputies get customer service awards or nominated for customer service awards. Many of them got the award where somebody just got a ticket. And so they take the time to go to myottawa.org after getting a ticket to nominate the guy who gave them a ticket or lady who gave them a ticket for a customer service award. Why would you do that? Well, they were treated so well. They weren't treated, condescendingly or you're a screw up, or they were actually treated with dignity. And that means a lot to people. Saving face as a human being, especially when we mess up, is important. And I could tell you stories for hours now that we've been doing this for 6-7 years of how our people are being recognized by the people they serve because of how they're treated. And so, but you need to unleash that. You unleash that by making sure people are trained, the expectations are set. We created a whole set of customer service expectations, and then we hold people accountable for it. And it's unbelievable how we flourished. Team members are equally committed to the success of the team and to the success of the larger organization. And again, I've said that before. It's really important. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped away. Okay. Last misconception. I'll get to the right slide. If employees are grouped into a team function, they will function as a team, and the organization will reap the benefit of teamwork. Yeah, okay. Hopefully you get there, but again, it's a lot of hard work. And you just go back to Mighty Ducks and forming, storming, norming, and performing. Remember, every team goes through that, and all the teams we're talking about today, all those processes, it's the exact same thing. Again, not just when a team is initially formed, but every time somebody comes new to a team or leaves the team, it's a different team dynamic, and at least briefly you go through that forming stage. I think high-performing teams, organizations of higher quality people, those forming and storming transitions can be a lot briefer. But if you do end up hiring a dud, or if you don't have an organization that's quite ready for all this, then that forming can take too long, storming can take too long. But the idea is to get to the norming and performing as quickly as possible with any team. All right, so moving on. Virtual teams. Virtual teams are used to communicate with team members, and usually this means there's a geographic component. So corporations use this. One of my friends did some consulting for Steelcase, and they had people in 13 different countries that this person was leading a session for from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, China, Germany, all together going through a day-long deal. And that's a virtual meeting, because if you can think of the time and expense, time lost, just to get everybody together in one room. Alternative work sites, long-distance work, telecommuting, regional branch offices. I mean, it's just becoming more of a norm as travel costs get higher, and just the efficiency savings and how quickly you can move, how nimble. We talked about networked organization versus a hierarchical organization. This is part of it. I mean, if I could have a meeting with my 13 chiefs around the world and call it in 2 days instead of setting it up for next month, I mean, the whole organization moves faster and is more competitive or productive and productive. Okay, virtual teams make ever-increasing use of technology. So we've seen that during COVID. Most of us are using Zoom, GoToMeetings, WebEx, all these things we've kind of dabbled in, used once in a great while. I've got meetings every day using this technology now. We actually had our first board meeting using that technology earlier this week. Okay, implementing teams. So this isn't a type of team, it's a process of how you implement teams. So some of the standards, some of the things you need to keep in mind while you're implementing a team is, does implementing the team move the organization closer to future goal achievement? If it doesn't, I think you need to rethink your why. Why am I not doing this? Or why is it not likely going to achieve the goal that I think it is? Completion of an organizational readiness for a big deal is, you need to do it. I mean, there's just many, and you'll see that in the chapter, there's many things you can test and measure, things that you need to do to prepare the organization to be ready to implement a certain team in a certain area. Is the organization in the right place to culturally implement teams to begin with? Is the organizational resourced properly? We talked about these things. Managers need to be firm about team direction. Look, this is what we're doing. This is why. No questions asked. This is what we're doing. But then when the team is formed, don't micromanage it. In fact, the best teams, if the boss is even part of a team, which most of the time I would recommend not be the case, the boss has to take the boss hat off. And it's a real test of a culture whether the other people on the team and the boss can interact as equals on a team. Because the danger is the boss, by nature of their power position, what they say will have too much weight for the team to actually release their brains and be able to function well, which is why I say typically the boss can be kind of the charter holder and maybe in charge of implementation, but doesn't really be part of the work team. And if so, it's got to be a special culture, special individual, and special relationships to pull that off, in my experience. Okay, and again, just the manager should not micromanage how the team works together, how they get it done. The importance is the manager sets a team in motion, gives it its charter, gives it the measures that will be judged by whether it's successful or not, and so there's that accountability piece. And then really they need to step back and let the team do its thing. Team effectiveness, so a team is more effective if it's well designed and if the organization is both designed to support it and the culture is ready for it. So more of the same. Team success depends on the external leader, so you need wisdom and when to set it up, why to set it up, how to set it up, and then not to meddle with it once you set it up. And the person that can do that is going to have successful teams. Performance evaluations, both team and individual, team structure, size of the team, the life expectancy, how long will the team exist, diversity of the team, and team training are all very important factors that lead to the success. All right, so moving on to next slide, set expectations for team effectiveness. It is critically important for the greater organization, the external leader, and each team member to understand the role of each team member and also the metrics that will determine success or failure. See the chart on page 329 for indicators of positive and negative experiences in teamwork. So it's a great tool. I guess I say keep the book because this is stuff that even I can use, and I've been doing this a long, long time. But maybe back to metrics, two really easy ones I think that you should learn. And when you look at performance measurement, you're really looking at two things. You're looking at output measures and outcome measures. So output measures are merely counts of things. It might be really important to know how many traffic tickets a day one of our deputies can write. Because if each one takes 15 to 20 minutes and there's way too many speeders in a certain zone, then we may need another car there in order to handle that load. So having a count of how many, once we know how long it should take, can be important information. The unfortunate thing is output measures, and output measures, by the way, are still very most common in local government, and I would suspect in a lot of nonprofit organizations. I've been part of a movement for 20 years, to have organizations use more and more outcome measures. So outcome measures tell you how you're doing. Are you doing good or aren't you doing so good? Where output measures tell you how many times you did something, and then you can draw conclusions from that. So with an outcome measure, how quickly did you do it? If I've got somebody If we can improve a process where we can do those traffic tickets in 10 minutes instead of 15, then when you look at thousands and thousands and thousands of those over a year, you might actually save a position, have enough money to put another position on somewhere where you need it, depending, because those little numbers, little savings can add up to a big deal over many, many thousand occurrences. And outcome measures, probably the most real beneficial outcome measure is, what do your customers think? And that's why so many places you go in, you'll see a little pad on the counter, or you get an email or a text or whatever asking how we did. Ultimately, how the people you serve think the service went is probably the most valuable outcome measure. All right, next slide. Individual styles and team development, contributor, collaborator, communicator, and challenger. So I want you to turn to page 332 in the book. And so just real quickly, what I'd like you to do is go through the exercise of determining what you are. Are you a contributor, collaborator, communicator, challenger? And again, just do me a one-page that kind of explains why you think that. Contributor, this is a task-oriented member who enjoys providing the team with good technical information and data, does his or her homework, and pushes the team to set high performance standards and to use its resources wisely. A dependable person. A collaborator is a goal-oriented member who sees the vision, mission, or goal of the team as paramount, but who is flexible and open to new ideas. He or she is willing to share the limelight with others and is viewed as a person who sees the big picture. Communicator. This is a process-oriented individual with good listening and facilitative skills. He or she is viewed as a good people person who is able to resolve conflict and build informal, relaxed relationships. And a challenger, this person openly questions the goals and methods of the team and is willing to disagree with the leader. Respectful disagreement with the leader is key in order for organizations to move forward without fear and with safety and with willingness to step out and try new things and to fail. Whoop, darn it. Okay, there we go. Challenger, this person openly questions the goals and methods of the team and is willing to disagree with the leader. So again, this person encourages risk-taking and is appreciated for their candor and openness. So if you know that there's people who disagree and they're disagreeable about it, and you're almost pissed off right away, so it's hard for your brain to engage in the positive aspect of what they might be, the constructive criticism in what they're saying. And then hopefully you've also known those kind of people that are able to disagree in a very agreeable fashion, where or constructive fashion, where you know it's about the issue at hand and not about the leader. And that's just a critical talent, trait, skill to have. All right, again, there's a few pages on forming, storming, norming, and performing. All I'll say is I think it'd be really valuable for you once you know your contributor, collaborator, communicator, challenger status. I think it'd be really good for you to go through that framework that we learned in such great intensity early in the class in relation to those and to your category. All right. Well, we're getting towards the end. We got about 4 more slides. So team conflict, types of tension and conflicts. Interpersonal or within oneself, interpersonal or between 2 or more people on the team, structural or conflicts that are innate to the organizational structure or the work, values or beliefs or differences may be attached to deep-seated emotions, which will make it really hard for somebody to let go of certain positions that may make it harder for them to contribute to the team. Coffee. It's what separates us from the animals. All right. Personality or differences in style and behavior can sometimes be disruptive to a team. Perception or differences in view or perspective of the situation or issue. This is why making sure teams get together on the why, and also, so they know why they're doing this, what's the importance, what's at stake, and then ultimately, how the team's going to work together and that. Because if people don't get it and you try doing a team process, it's going to make it really hard to pull off. And then work methods or disagreements about solving problems crop up, and it's important to stop and talk through those. I had a new team in IT doing lean work, and they debated terms. Like we did that thing at the beginning of class on fuzzy ideas. They came across words where I think one time they spent 3 hours on one word, and it's like a dam broke, and they were able to really kick butt with the lean process they were working on. But you can't just gloss over things and move on if there isn't a common understanding of what you're talking about, because that will kind of shoot the team down as far as being able to achieve everything it might otherwise. Next slide, building an ethical and collaborative environment. So define and build a shared purpose through trust and organizational cohesion, the why. Cultivate an ethic of contribution, which means going beyond one's formal responsibilities to solve broader problems, not just apply greater effort or do a good job. So develop scalable processes for coordinating people's efforts. So basically, document the team efforts. You do that in a lean Toyota Kata type process. Document how things went. Document the processes, and then the next team has that to review and build on. So you're not recreating the wheel. It's not Groundhog Day every time you do a team. You're actually able to learn from the previous team and keep perfecting. You never get perfect, but hopefully every time you do it, you get better at it, and the rest of the organization can learn not just from the outcome of your team why or goal, but actually learn how to be a team better, how to run a team process even better. So create an infrastructure that values and rewards collaboration. So again, if you keep, one of my commissioners said, hey, when this is all over, we really need to recognize Nick, our emergency manager, because he's the general in this COVID crisis. And then he's absolutely right. Our emergency manager is probably the best in the state, maybe the country, does a phenomenal job, but he relies on a huge team. And to pull that person up front and recognize just that person could do a lot of damage for all the people that have been killing it. Some literally have worked 24/7 on COVID. And then to just pull out the one person, I said, look, I think it's a great idea to recognize this person because they're doing a phenomenal job. But bring their whole team up and recognize this person in front of their team and allow them to introduce their team. And you have to start thinking that way. Or, because as human beings, we like recognition. We like to know that our efforts are appreciated. And if every bit we do is just to make the leader look good, that's not going to really lead to the best team culture in the future. Interestingly, the U.S. Department of Labor has a recipe for team success, which I thought was interesting, but also on target. Have clarity on the goals of the team, develop an improvement plan, clearly define roles, communicate clearly, and keep in mind the beneficial team behaviors that we've discussed. So I think it's good advice, the kind of thing you can put on a little card and throw in your wallet or purse or whatever, or in a file on your notes on your phone. But it's good to keep some of these frameworks handy, because I think all of you, as I've said, are going to be leaders. You're going to be managers. And this book is it's a wealth of information that you can look back to someday when you have to put a team together, or you become a leader of a team, or a member of a team, or have some role related. Dictator by default. This is just one of the risks, and especially for someone like me, like I said, it's both a very good thing, but it's also blinded me in a few ways, that I've always been number two. I've either reported to the number one person, worked as the second in charge, or been in charge of an organization my entire career of over 36 years. And so in a way, that's great. I've always been at the top. I've always kind of been in on that big picture strategy, managing an organization, but I've never fought the battles of the lower level of the organization, or being a mid-level manager and working my way up and having to compete and deal with other mid-level managers. And so it created some blind spots. But where that feeds into the topic is, look, if a team can't reach a satisfactory decision, then it defaults to the chief administrator or whoever the boss is to make a decision. And that's kind of dictator by default. You've just defeated the team process, the goal of having teams. Your culture isn't right, either just for that instance because of specific circumstances, or maybe it's a greater problem and you just weren't ready to do the teams. But unfortunately, if the team doesn't get to a successful conclusion and the boss has to make the decision, you've just wasted the time in the team. And so kind of sobering when you think about it. But anyways, you'll see behind me, behind my left shoulder, two swans, a black swan and a green swan. So in business, a black swan, or organizational thinking, I should say, not just business. A black swan is an unexpected crisis that has huge impacts, huge negative impacts, but it also opens the door to opportunities. And then the green swan, and look these up, Google them. It's kind of cool reading. And then the green swan represents kind of the process you go through to actually do some really cool new things after a black swan event has occurred. And there will be some positives that come out of COVID. For some of you, it's been pretty negative, especially if you're graduating, but at least you know your graduation ceremony is now scheduled for October. Hopefully you'll be able to do that. I think it's a significant life achievement, and I'd strongly recommend that. But your life has been disrupted at a very critical time when you'd be, having a lot of parties and hanging out with friends. And I think of our German students, Lene and Nico, who had their, at least this term abroad, cut in half and had to go back to Germany. So, there's been big impacts. But I think that in terms, hopefully one of the things I'm focusing my study on right now is resiliency in organizations. But you don't have resilient organizations unless you have resilient people in them. And I can tell just by how many of you have responded, even just to my class, which is just one class, a very limited connection I have with you, is that you're resilient people, and that will serve you well into the future. And I would encourage you in your personal life, in your professional life, which is going to unfold before you in the next year to two, I would really encourage you to look for that green swan. What are the things that are going to really improve? What are opportunities? Like I said, the electronic meeting, that's going to explode. People working from home. My IT department set up over 300 people in 1 week to work from home. We've had a good experience with it. We've toyed around with it with a few people in a few situations, had mixed results. But we know now that in a week, we can ramp up and get people working from home. There's areas we found weaknesses, and we'll be better for that in the future. And so what are the positives that come out of this kind of a crappy situation that's been dumped on all of us? So, and I think that when you can keep your mind operating partially in the positive zone, you can be a better organizational leader, because you need to be kind of that person that keeps things moving. And you don't keep things moving if you're a pessimist and if you're negative. You've got to be at least a realist, not overly optimistic, but you need to lead. And leaders aren't whiners. So anyways, thank you for listening in. One of the things Grand Valley wasn't ready for was dumping 5,000 classes online in 3 days or 4 days or whatever it was. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get certified in teaching online, even though I much prefer to be in class with you. There's so much more I can do with breaking you into groups, doing separate exercises that I can't do online. But you know what? I'll be prepared if something like this happens again. And there may come a day when maybe I'll teach a class for Northern, and I can do it from Grand Rapids or Ottawa County. So personally, I'm going to improve because of all this. So anyways, I'll have more communication with you on Blackboard. This will be my second and final video, so hopefully it worked out okay. And I will be in touch later today. I'll post the PowerPoint.